I am going to speak a little bit about Buddhism. Buddhism is a religion, a philosophy that has its roots way back in 500 BC with the founding from. Um, it's a little misunderstood at times, um, but it's best understood in the AP World History context as a lot of comparison and contrast between Buddhism and Hinduism. Both have influence within South and East Asia, but we'll see that each, have different effects when it comes to social class and even how governments interact with its people. So, how does Buddhism begin? Buddhism begins right at the beginning of what we call the classical age, started by Siddhartha Gautama. And he is a Hindu prince. We learned about Hinduism yesterday. He is a member of the Kshatriya caste. I apologize if I mispronounce anything or if any of my interpretations of the philosophy are misconstrued. So Siddhartha is a member of this really high up caste. He is a prince. He lives a life of luxury. And there's this prophecy that, if he stays in his town, he's going to be the greatest ruler they've ever had. If, he leaves and, forms a religion, he's going to be the greatest religious leader that there's ever been. Okay, so there's a lot of, hype around this guy as it is. And his dad wants him to stay and take over, He wants him to stay and rule. And so he gives him every possible thing you could imagine. He lives a life of total ease. And so he gets everything that he absolutely wants. And he lives like this all the way until he turns 29. And at 29, he finally realizes that he needs to see more of the world. And he's absolutely shocked by what he sees once he leaves, the castle that he's grown up in. He goes out and he sees the actual world, and he's shocked by it. He sees suffering. He sees, disease. He sees old age. These are all things that he's never seen before, and he's surprised and he's shocked by it, and he's angry that these things have been hidden from him. And so he says, there's so much suffering in the world. How are we going to be able to stop this? So there's another religious movement going on in India called Jainism, and you may have heard of this. And Jainism is essentially a philosophy where it is strict non-violence. It is a adherence, a devotion to living a life well within your means, even, poverty. You cannot do anything that would harm anyone, even an insect. And so Siddhartha says, okay, this is going to be the way that I can help stop suffering. If I, strictly commit myself to nonviolence, then I won't have any negative impact upon the world. So he takes this vow of poverty, and pretty much the only thing that you can do is meditate. He takes this vow of nonviolence. He gives up his royal title. He gives up every luxury that he has, and he joins the Jainis. And the Jainis are very, very committed to this vow of poverty and this vow of nonviolence, to the point where the most committed members of the philosophy die. They starve themselves because they are so committed to this. And so we can see over the course of time how he moves from being this prince to really becoming emaciated and, on the verge of death. And so he realizes that, maybe I've gone too far. Jainism, I'm not really doing anything to eliminate suffering in the world. I'm just, taking this vow of poverty upon myself. I'm not committing myself to stopping suffering elsewhere. I'm not helping those, around me. I'm kind of doing something that he views as even selfish. And so he says, look, hunger, starving myself is not going to end suffering. But I've also lived a life of wealth, and I know that that is not going to end suffering either. And so he does, considers that there's got to be some sort of middle path. There has to be a middle way that can help alleviate some of the suffering in the world. And so he continues to meditate, and he eventually reaches enlightenment. His soul is released from the idea of suffering because it is released from the idea of desire. And we'll learn more about that when we get into the sutras. And so this is kind of your typical symbolism of Buddhism. You have here the Buddha. He is sitting underneath the Bodhi tree. He has lotus flowers underneath him, and generally this aura around him. And he has become enlightened in the Buddha. And he says, okay, I have, seen both paths. I have reached enlightenment and nirvana. It is going to be my goal to teach others this philosophy. And thus, Buddhism is created. So he goes and he begins to teach others the way, and essentially he teaches a couple of key ideas. And you can see these in the graphic organizer that we've posted. So what he viewed was that there is reincarnation and there is karma, similar to the ideas of Hinduism. But instead of moving up and down a caste system once you're reincarnated based on karma, you just move around the circle. You live, you die, you live, you die, so on and so forth. And you just move around the wheel. You're not going up and down. You're not improving in ranking or scale. And so this is a very key difference between Hinduism and Buddhism. In Hinduism, you have this class system, the caste system. You have people that are born better than others, and only a select few, those at the top caste, can achieve enlightenment and nirvana. And Buddhism shows something, shocking, that anyone can achieve enlightenment and nirvana by understanding the Four Noble Truths and following the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths. Siddhartha, Buddha at this point, says life is suffering. Now, it seems bleak, but what he means is that, we always want things. Suffering is caused by desire. Our constant want for things is always going to leave us unsatisfied in some way, and we view that as suffering. And the only way for us to end this suffering is to end desire. If, we don't want something that we don't need, then there's no suffering. And, all of our suffering comes from desire, but we can end this. We can end this want of things that are not, absolutely in our inherent needs. So what he says is you need to follow the Eightfold Path in order to achieve enlightenment and nirvana. And this Eightfold Path consists of 8 steps. The first 4, knowledge, purpose, speech, conduct, we describe that essentially as talking the talk. Do you understand, the ways of the Buddha? Are you trying to, help others more than you help yourselves? Anyone can really do these first 4 of being purposeful and being kind and conducting yourself in the right way. But the last 4, occupation, effort, awareness, and meditation, are extremely difficult, because the Buddha calls for you to leave your life wherever it may be and to become a monk. In order to achieve enlightenment, you really need to focus, and you need to put the effort in to understand the mystery of the religion. You need to understand how to achieve enlightenment. And you can't do that unless you have committed the time to it. And he says once you have done all 8 of these things, you are able to achieve nirvana. After effort, awareness, and meditation, you can reach nirvana, this enlightenment and peace. And the way that he describes it is it's the snuffing out of a flame. It's when you take a candle and you take that flame out, you are getting rid of all of the desires that you have. And the soul has gone through all of these cycles, and it was finally ready to accept, enlightenment. And now you are able to finally rest. And so what we'll see is a split within Buddhism. A couple of, or 2 different, denominations believe different things. One denomination believes that you can choose to come back. Once you've achieved enlightenment, you can jump back in this circle as a bodhisattva, and that is misspelled. It's actually Bodhisattva. I need to correct that. Not Bodhavista, but bodhisattva. A bodhisattva comes back into this life, having achieved nirvana in a previous life. One branch of Buddhism believes that the Dalai Lama is a bodhisattva, someone who has achieved enlightenment in a prior life. And so you can already start to see the clear differences between Buddhism and Hinduism. You don't have the structured roles in society that you see within Hinduism. And so this is going to appeal specifically to the lower class and the lower, people in the caste system, because they don't need to undergo life after life after life after life to try and inch their way up to nirvana if they can achieve it within this life. You don't need nirvana without oppression, In Hinduism, you have to earn it through hundreds of lives and thousands of lives. And here, the way of the Buddha is saying anyone can achieve enlightenment. And so he writes down all of these ideas in what we call the sutras, these core beliefs, the moral codes, how you are to live your life. So we understand why, people may prefer it to Hinduism. You're not stuck in this caste system. You're not stuck being someone that you have been told you have to be, and you have to live your entire life under the control of someone else in the hope that you can inch your way up in the next life. But it doesn't really gain traction until we have the Mauryan Empire and the Mauryan king Asoka. Okay? Asoka is this incredible military ruler, and he expands the Mauryan Empire in India, and really builds the empire out, adds lots of territories. And so After one battle, Ahsoka looks and he sees at what he's done, and he realizes that, he's caused tremendous amounts of suffering. He's brought suffering onto thousands and thousands of people, and he swears off violence, and he becomes Buddhist. He converts to Buddhism. And so lots of people want to cozy up to the king. Lots of people want to be in his favor. And so for the first time and the only time in history, the majority of what we call India was something other than Hindu. It was Buddhist for the lifetime of the king. So he creates pillars all over the empire. It's got the teachings of Buddha all over it. And so for the first time, most of the empire is Buddhist. Now the king dies and the empire collapses without him. And the empire and modern India will return to being Hindu. So looking very briefly at the tenets of Buddhism, originally the Buddhists just believe that there was one Buddha. The Buddha is not a god, okay? The Buddha is not a deity. The Buddha offered a philosophy and a religion. So make sure you keep that in mind. This is not a monotheistic religion, because that would insinuate that you worship the Buddha as a god. Rather, you just accept maybe that the Buddha is the only one to achieve enlightenment, maybe that many others have achieved enlightenment. So eventually the Hindus force the Buddhists out of India, and they're forced out essentially throughout Southeast Asia, East Asia, Central Asia, all along the Silk Road, this trade route throughout Asia. Okay. One of the most significant ways that it spreads are through these Buddhist monasteries. So two ideas that we're going to kind of break down here. These Buddhist monks travel all over, and they eventually carve out these large monasteries into mountains. And there in these monasteries, they would live there, they would devote their entire lives to meditation, and they would live on very simple means. They could get by. And so, being on the Silk Road, merchants would stop here. And the monks, even though they didn't have many means to themselves, would prepare them food and give them a place to stay along the Silk Road. And in exchange, the Buddhist monks would say, well, let me tell you at least about Buddhism. Let me share this message. And, sometimes the merchants would go on their way, and other times, it would really take hold, and the merchants would convert, and they would continue to go along the Silk Road, and they would spread the message and spread the way of the Buddha. And that's one of the most significant ways that Buddhism is able to spread during this time period. So what do I mean by monasteries and monasticism? Monks build these places so that they can separate themselves from society, and they can really dig in and try and understand the deepest parts of the religion, the real teachings of Buddha. Steps 5 through 8 to reach enlightenment would have to take place at monasteries. And so, again, compare that to Hinduism, right? Monasteries allow the poor. Monasteries allow women, unhappy people that had lived their lives in situations where they were oppressed, could instead turn to monasteries and could turn to the way of the Buddha and to religion instead of, a life of oppression. Consider India during this time. It's extremely patriarchal. It very much favors the men. There's a practice where, if a husband or a grandfather were to die, women would throw themselves onto the flaming pyres. And this is a practice that wasn't outlawed until the 1800s, And so while there's a very, strong caste system and organization within Hinduism, and I don't mean to disparage Hinduism at all, but Buddhism does offer, women, the poor, people that were oppressed prior, a chance to escape from this patriarchy and escape from oppression. And we're able to change your social class, change your position, change your overall, outlook and ability to achieve happiness. So we see this in Buddhism, and we also see this in Christianity. Both offer monasteries that will become really significant. So the last concept that's really important is that Buddhism changes as it spreads. And it's not necessarily cultural diffusion where people take onto, a different ideal, but it's syncretism where ideas start to blend with one another and they adapt. The teachings of the Buddha in China aren't going to be perceived in the same way as they are in Europe. And so the philosophy adapts as it spreads. For instance, we see this image here, right? We see the Buddha next to Hercules. And, it may make no sense to you at all, but consider Alexander the Great. When he's 18 years old, he's going around conquering Greece, conquering Persia, spreading his influence. Well, his empire is right next to India, and you start to see a blend of the cultures, what we call Hellenistic synthesis. So Hellenistic means from Greek, and synthesis, which is kind of the blending of cultures. So let's go back to this map real quick. Like I said, there's two types of Buddhism. We have Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. Now, Theravada believes that only one person has ever achieved nirvana, and that is the Buddha, Siddhartha. Mahayana Buddhism believes in those bodhisattvas that we've discussed before. Okay? So let's think about why this happens and why this spreads. Let's say that a merchant who has traveled through the Silk Road, has converted to Buddhism, arrives in China. China may be polytheistic in this time. They've had, a bountiful harvest, and they are celebrating the god of the rain. Okay? Now, the merchant has a couple of options. They can say, what are you doing? Why are you worshiping the god of the rain? That's dumb. Here's the way of the Buddha. This makes more sense. You're not going to get a lot of people to convert like that, right? And so instead, he arrives and he sees people worshiping the god of the rain. And he says, oh, I didn't realize that you guys were Buddhists here too. And they're all like, what's Buddhism? We're not Buddhists. And he said, oh, no. You're worshiping the bodhisattva of farming. You're worshiping the bodhisattva of the harvest. That's the Buddha helping you. That's someone who's achieved nirvana helping you. And so it's an adaptation of polytheism. It's a synthesis that happens when you go from one place to another and you want your, philosophy to begin to take hold. And as we've discussed before, you can spread your ideas in a lot of different ways, through military, through merchants, through missionaries. But as people travel, especially with new, greater goods, they're more willing to listen. And they may say, oh, yeah, of course, we are, Buddhists. We are worshiping the bodhisattva of the harvest. Okay? So we see change happen with Buddha? Now, consider where Buddha's from in India. Here, Buddha very clearly looks East Asian, and it's an adaptation to the circumstances. It's an adaptation with polytheism that, you have different Buddhas all throughout, but also, you want to support a religious figure that you can connect with, that you believe, knows you, loves you, respects you, all those things, right? And so the Buddha may look like a Greek god when it came to Alexander's empire. The Buddha may look Chinese in China, A modern example, we see the many different portraits of Jesus ranging from, where he was in Jerusalem in the Middle East, all the way to very nearly Caucasian and white. People want to take in a religious figure that makes sense to them. And so the more adaptable a philosophy is, the more, understanding it is of the context within which it's in, the more likely it is to spread and take hold. So we looked at the foundations of Buddhism. We looked at how it changes as it spread. And notably, we looked at how it could shake up the hierarchy, how people who, wanted to improve their stake in life could do so through Buddhism.